Today, some of our best segments from the global lane. The U.S. President Abraham Lincoln freed slaves. Today in Africa, a former slave wants to be president. Former slave Bol Gai Deng has declared his candidacy for president of the world's newest nation, South Sudan. He joins us today from Nairobi, Kenya, along with the CEO of the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari. First, Mr. Deng, thank you for being with us. Many of our viewers are unaware that slavery still exists today in many parts of Africa and the Middle East. Briefly summarize your story. How was it that you became a slave?
Thank you for having me, and I want to thank your audience for listening. Yes, my name is Bol Gai Deng. I was a slave in 1987 as a young boy in my village. There was the government of Sudan declared the war against the rebel of South Sudan, Christian, majority Christian. I became a victim of that because they took me and very much they beat up the majority of my family. I was kidnapped. I was taken with more than 700 kids, walked 250 miles all the way from the South Sudan to North Sudan. And then I realized that I got sold in the market. And I did not realize that because I didn't know how to speak Arabic at that time. I used to speak only the Africa Denka language. And then I have to be beat up. I have to be told what to do. And sometimes they used to put the chain in my legs to the point where I have become so disciplined to my master. And then he gave me a little bit of assignment to go and give the cattle water. Then from that escape, I managed to run to the capital of Sudan, which is the Khartoum. And then I got received by the international organization, which is a Catholic charity at the time. And then I ended up at Khartoum. And then also with another problem that Khartoum was very much in sponsor of Osama bin Laden, the man who under mastermind the 9/11, lived in Khartoum for 6 years. Then from there, actually, I went to Egypt. From Egypt, I got asylum to the United States in 1999.
How old were you, Bol, when you became a slave?
I was around 7 years old at the time. I was young at 7 years old.
And how long were you a slave?
I've been a slave for 3 years.
And as a former slave, I know you have expressed some concerns about the Black Lives Matter movement here in the U.S., also the teaching of critical race theory. What are you telling people? What's your concern?
My concern is that they need to understand that slavery still exists in Africa. We are talking about the 21st century slave, and I believe the Black Lives Matter do not understand what's going on in Africa. They don't know what is going on around the world. In fact, the United States is the only country in the world that can give a slave freedom to become a congresswoman. You cannot find that in the world except in the United States of America. United States of America is the only country that can free you for a point where you can get a decent jobs, and be a free man as a Black woman and African woman, and to become an African American. I think they need to understand that the slavery still exists, and they need education, and they need to listen to people in my background that Africa today, more than 9.2 million are still in captivity. In slavery. If you go to Libya right now, while I'm talking in North Africa, a slave has to be sold for $400 US. A woman has to be sold for $400 US in the market in Libya right now. So that means that they need to open up to the world and know the crisis of slavery still exists in Africa and around the world.
And many of those people that are advocating Black Lives Matter here in the U.S. and CRT have never been to Africa. Sargis, it's good to talk to you again. You are in Kenya right now, so why are you there?
It's good to be here, Gary. I'm actually here because we're doing a regional assessment of what is happening within the region here after the fall of Kabul. As you know, there's two strategic points for the U.S. and globally. One is actually northern Iraq. The other one is here in South Sudan. And South Sudan now is a point where all the various different terror networks are focusing on, given the fact that the government is not strong and possibly not capable of holding that territory.
Are they forming camps?
Well, there's a lot of weapons that move through here, especially through the refugee camps. You got the Somali influence coming in. Since I've been on the ground just a couple of days ago, there was an actual ISIS attack in Sudan itself, trying to topple the government, where 10 officers were killed. You had immigrants that came here from Afghanistan that were captured crossing illegally in southern Sudan. So we know that now is becoming a focal point for them. Unfortunately, the worry is for the regional governments, whether it be Kenya, Uganda, and others, that it is very possible that this will destabilize the ability of these governments also to secure and also economically develop the region.
Okay, from Nairobi, Kenya, South Sudan presidential candidate Bolgai Deng, and Near East Center for Strategic Engagement CEO Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari. Thank you both for being with us. As America ended its longest war, a discussion about Afghanistan and the war's impact on troop morale and veterans. Well, here with more is Steele Brand. He's Associate Professor of History at the King's College. Mr. Brand is a U.S. Army veteran who served in Afghanistan as a tactical intelligence officer. So, Steele, U.S. military involvement is done, at least for now. So how hard is it on those troops returning home, especially those who survived Afghanistan when 2,231 of their brothers in arms did not?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on the show. If you look at what has happened, there's this rapid turnaround, a dramatic swing of military fortune that has just occurred. A success that was highly imperfect, but easy to hold with a small number of troops, minimal commitments, and a diplomatic corps has now turned into an absolute failure. I mean, there's no other way to look at it than a failure. We've broken our promises to the Afghans. Biden broke his promises to us and the Afghans. It was not safe and orderly. People have been left behind, and now we don't even have diplomatic personnel in the country. So I think a lot of veterans are looking at this and thinking, oh my goodness, my service was in vain. Everything I've done, the lives that I saw that were lost, my buddies who are no longer here, the wounds that I will always carry with me, and not just physical, but also emotional, all of these things feel like there were sacrifices that were worthless. These veterans need to be reminded that their work was not in vain. They represented a series of virtues that are indispensable to a proper functioning republic: discipline, loyalty, trust, courage, self-sacrifice, serving your country. These vets did that for 20 years. Whether we win, whether we lose, that is good, period.
Yeah, they did a great job. So what effect do you think it would have on the troops if American political and military leaders were to be held accountable for the way the withdrawal was conducted?
Yeah, I mean, this needs to happen. There needs to be a reckoning that comes both in the midterm and then in the presidential election in 3 years. Americans, I think, need to look at what are the values that we've tried to influence other people to adopt abroad, sometimes unsuccessfully, but there are these good values, and I mentioned them: religious liberty, constitutional government, human dignity. And then what are the virtues that are needed to actually push those values through? And those are the things that I think our vets know very well. They're trained to do them. They're trained to honor the flag. They're trained to do their job, even if they feel like their leaders at that moment aren't doing what's best for them. They're trained to do what they can do to fulfill their duty. And they're trained to keep their word, to have trust, to be trustworthy. I mean, these are things that we need to demand of our leadership. It's not just about bad strategic choices. It's about a failure of principles. It's about a failure of morals that has occurred at the national level.
And it seems like it just keeps happening and happening. You're a history professor at the King's College, so let's look back. It seems since the Korean War, ever since the Korean War, actually, the United States never really goes into war and then wins it. Truman wouldn't let General MacArthur push the Chinese back across the Yalu River shortly after troops were pulled from Vietnam. The communists moved into Saigon, then seized control, and matters got worse in the region. Remember, the Khmer Rouge came to power in Cambodia. 2 million people died, and then Desert Storm. Many of our troops wanted to chase Saddam all the way back to Baghdad, and the U.S. withdrew. And then we returned a decade later, and then we withdrew again from Iraq. ISIS came to power, killing tens of thousands and establishing a caliphate in Syria. And now the Taliban take over Afghanistan. Why does this keep happening?
You've got two totally incompatible ideas. One is that America, from its founding, is anti-colonial. It opposes sort of occupation and empire, okay? And, there are merits to that. But then there's this other desire, and that is to spread democracy. And George W. Bush's idea was spread it through building up nations. That's a really tricky thing to do. There may be kind of a reason to try it, but when you put those two together, that's what creates what we've had since the Cold War. The average when I was in Afghanistan, the number one lesson I learned in 2012 was I can't control everything. There are things that are just way beyond my capacity to direct. And I was in the know. I was a tactical intelligence officer. But what I did realize is I can do my job. And that is what we need average citizens to try to do at home. We need to bring these values and we need to practice them on the home front. We need to be loyal to our neighbors. That's a military virtue applied to everyone. We need to speak the truth. We need to serve other people and be willing to sacrifice for them. And we also need to be able to serve our country. But if we emphasize civic vices, the kinds of things that we've been doing right now with our top leadership and the United States, America's not going to succeed militarily or even domestically. And that's what we've seen the last 2 years. But instead, if we emphasize civic virtues, the kinds of things I've been talking about, every single citizen doing that, and then demand that of our leadership, that's when we can see us picking the right path to go where we want to go.
And thank those veterans, those soldiers returning home for doing their duty. Okay, Steele Brand, Associate Professor of History at the King's College, thanks for providing those insights. We appreciate it. When the American Jewish Committee recently questioned young Americans ages 18 to 29 about anti-Semitism, more than half of them said they were unfamiliar with the meaning of the word. That shocking finding comes as anti-Jewish and anti-Israel sentiment proliferates on American college campuses and even in the halls of the U.S. Congress. Well, here to set us straight is the executive director of Passages, a group that connects Christian college students with Israel and the roots of their Judeo-Christian faith. Scott, it's always good to have you with us. So the boycott, divest, and sanction, the BDS movement against Israel, really began and spread on college campuses. Anti-Semitic speech is allowed, while those who speak in favor of Israel are often silenced. So tell us what you've witnessed about this rising hostility on college campuses, and why do you think it's happening?
Well, Gary, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you. It's truly an honor. You're exactly right. This did start on college campuses. And, I think something that we've seen time and time again with our Jewish friends on campuses, and when our Christian students come back from Israel, we help engage them with their local Jewish community on the campus, because simply more and more young Jewish people, Jewish students, are afraid to be Jewish on their campuses. They're afraid to wear any kind of outward signs. I think that exists beyond campus, but specifically on campus, it's a scary place for a lot of our Jewish friends. And that just can't be. We can't let that sort of sit back and let that happen. And so, it's very important that our students understand what anti-Semitism is, and when they go back to campus, to build bridges of friendship and allyship with their Jewish friends. And
all they have to do is ask their Jewish friends because they know what it is when they see it and experience
Absolutely.
it. But I mean, this is shocking. They can't even wear a kippah on college campuses. And I've heard even some young Christians say just because they're unsupportive of Israel doesn't mean they're anti-Semitic. But how do you respond to young people or anyone who says that?
I think it's important to understand that the state of Israel is a product of the Jewish people, their efforts at self-determination. Obviously, you can be critical of Israel. You don't have to agree with everything Israel says or does. No country is perfect. But certainly to support Israel, to not support Israel's existence as a Jewish state is really a whole other matter. And as allies, we have to support what our friends believe that they need, and we know that they need, which is a Jewish state that is safe and secure.
And it isn't just college administrators and professors influencing college students, Scott. How are some congressional leaders shaping young American attitudes about Israel and the Jews, especially on social media? What are they doing? How does that make a difference?
Sure. Well, I think it's all over society, and I think it just didn't come out of sort of nowhere. Obviously, this has been brewing for years and years. And obviously, there are those out there on campuses and all over the place that would not agree that Israel has a right to exist. And so I think what you see is just, in Congress or wherever in leadership is just a product. It's really ultimately a symptom of the foundational issue, which is there is anti-Semitism, and it's been around for a long time. And of course, since the state of Israel was founded, there's been criticism at its existence. And so I think it's a product of what's been happening and what's been happening more and more.
And we see it more now because of social media, I think, just as it's
Absolutely.
out there where never before. Yeah. So what is your group Passages doing to help turn it all around?
Young people are becoming more and more separated from the Holocaust, from the founding of the state of Israel, and also separated from, a lot of the theological views of their parents. And so, therefore, it's not been on their radar. And so Passages aims to really, number one, provide a strong faith experience and help them to discover the roots of their faith. And number two, to help them encounter Israel and the people of Israel. And so we take them on these trips, these 9-day trips over to Israel. And of course, they visit the holy sites, but they also visit the people who live there today, both Israelis, Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, Palestinians, Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians. And so, one of the things is we want to show them Israel for what it is. We want to show them the reality of it versus what they've heard on social media, versus what they've heard in the mainstream media or on their campus, wherever it may be. There's room to support both a Jewish state and the self-determination of the Jewish people, as well as peace for Israelis and Palestinians. It's both. And so we take them, we show them, they come back from the trip, we provide additional educational resources, opportunities to lead, and opportunities to learn more.
Okay, up close and personal, the way to build relationships. Okay, Scott
Absolutely.
Phillips, Executive Director of Passages. Thank you, Scott, for setting us straight today. We appreciate it. Hollywood entertainers, even some stars in Nashville's country music industry, may get upset about the latest music drop from popular country singer RAELYNN. She recently gave birth to a baby girl, her smiling, precious little Daisy. The newborn inspired RAELYNN to write the song, which she says was in her heart. Although She Chose Me may be a bit controversial, RAELYNN says she will not shy away from hard subjects. The song is about a married, quote, Bible Belt loving believer who gets pregnant from an adulterous affair. She sings about how the mother could have had an abortion, but chose life. RAELYNN sings, if it went the other way, nobody would have blamed her. Think of all the small town talk it would have saved her. She could have chosen one quick fix to get her out of one big mess. She could have tied a different ribbon to the end of the story, could have kept her secret, gotten out before it changed her life.
She could have changed her mind and changed everything, but she chose me.
RAELYNN'S She Chose Me is timely. It came just as the U.S. House of Representatives narrowly passed the Women's Health Protection Act, which really isn't about protecting women's health at all. It's about assuring that nearly 1 million babies will be killed in the United States annually. If approved by the U.S. Senate and signed by President Biden, H.R. 3755 would sweep away state heartbeat and pro-life laws across the nation. Congressman Chris Smith says the legislation would, for the first time ever by congressional statute, quote, legally enable the death of unborn baby girls and boys by dismemberment, decapitation, forced expulsion from the womb. Folks, you see, pro-abortion politicians and lobbyists are in a panic. 5 U.S. Supreme Court justices have already refused to temporarily block the new abortion law in Texas from taking effect. Pro-life advocates believe that decision indicates this court may be ready to do away with Roe v. Wade next year. That's the 1973 court ruling which legalized abortion nationwide. Folks, more Americans are choosing life. Half as many abortions are expected to be performed this year than were performed in 1990. That's because 30 years later, we can actually see amazing 3D images of a baby growing in the womb, its heart beating after just 5 to 6 weeks of gestation. The detailed images are compelling and convincing. There's no doubt that this is more than just tissue. It's a human being created by God, preparing to experience life. It's time that we do away with the federal abortion mandate and allow states to choose their own path, to choose life. Unconvinced? Well, maybe you should take a long look in the mirror and then join RAELYNN in singing, "Mom, I'm glad that you chose me." This Thanksgiving, are you taking your history lesson about America's founding from the Pilgrims or the New York Times? The Times 1619 Project teaches that America's founding government and economy are based on slavery and white supremacy. It's the idea that America actually began in 1619 when the first African slaves arrived in Virginia. Folks, I'm here to share the truth. Like 30 million other Americans, I'm a descendant of Puritans who arrived in North America on the Mayflower in November 1620. Thanksgiving is a perfect time to commemorate the 400th anniversary of that historic event. You see, my 9th great-grandfather, Thomas Rogers, and 101 other pilgrims came to America seeking religious freedom. They fled tyranny and religious persecution in England. The British monarchy decreed that the Puritans and others would be punished if they did not conform to the beliefs of the Church of England. And when Thomas Rogers and 40 others signed the Mayflower Compact, they committed Plymouth Colony to godly governance. They wrote they'd be governed, quote, for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith. And that covenant had a profound and lasting impact on America. Listen to Dr. Jerry Newcomb, producer of the documentary The Pilgrims.
The Pilgrims gave us the Mayflower Compact, which was an agreement for self-government under God, which was really the first step in the creation, ultimately, of the Declaration of Independence and of the U.S. Constitution.
So, folks, like the Pilgrims, let's pray and commit ourselves to godly governance. And this Thanksgiving, let's rejoice, be thankful for God's blessings and for those Pilgrim settlers who provided this country with a godly foundation. They rejected slavery and embraced the freedom and joy which they knew in their hearts could only come from a heavenly king, not an earthly one. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, Parler, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.